Good Tuesday, everybody. Welcome into another episode of Pro Football Network's Draft Insider. Glad you are with us. Trey Wingo here. We'll be joined by Tony Pauline in a minute, but we are literally inside 10 days away from the draft. I'll be headed up to Vegas on Monday. Really excited to be there. We have so much to get to, and we are talking about a draft that has more uncertainty than potentially any draft in the last 15 or 20 years in terms of who's going to go where, and maybe even most importantly, who's going to go number one and what position is going to go number one. It is a draft unlike any other because of all the circumstances that we've gone through as a society as well as in football over the last couple of years. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let me bring in the one and only draft expert from Pro Football Network, Tony Pauline. Tony, how are you? Things are good. Water good. Heat good. Just checking because once again, you're stuck in Brett Yaris's dungeon somewhere.
Iced tea this week. I brought it myself, so there's no one else to blame but me if I don't have it. But yeah, everything's cool. I mean, like you said, getting closer to the draft, a little more exciting. The fact that there's so many questions at the top. No one knows what's going on. I personally think it's exciting. I mean, it's a bore knowing the week before the draft who the first 2 or 3 picks are. Now it's anybody's guess, which I think adds an element of intrigue to it all.
Yeah, it really is. And just some overriding themes of what we're talking about in this year's draft. Potentially, we have a quarterback to not go number one for only the second time in the last 8 years, going back to 2001 when Michael Vick was taken number one overall. This would only be the 6th time that a quarterback did not go number one overall. And there's still a great discrepancy over which player, let alone not a quarterback, will go number one overall, whether it's Aiden Hutchinson or Trayvon Davis or potentially an offensive lineman. So there really is a great amount of uncertainty. And there is the potential that we could have someone, a whole top 10 in the NFL draft, go without someone who actually touches the ball. Whether I'm talking about quarterback, wide receiver, running back, tight end, in the top 10 for the first time ever, dating back to 1936. We'll get into that in a minute. We're also going to be dealing with Tony's offensive linemen and those 8 teams that have double-digit picks in the first round. Again, as we stand right now, there are still 8 with those teams holding 2 picks in the first round, which has never happened before. So we're looking at an unprecedented draft on a lot of levels. We'll get into all of that, but we also have some NFL news to get up to date with. And Tony, let's start with just another player getting a massive contract, and that's Denzel Ward. The Browns corner is now the highest paid cornerback in the league. And again, we need to understand there's total evaluation of the contract versus the actual guaranteed dollars. The guaranteed dollars are the more significant, north of $70 million in guaranteed money for Denzel Ward from Cleveland. What do you make of this deal?
I mean, it's the natural progression of things. It's strange. I guess it's interesting in the sense that this is the same franchise that just gave a record-breaking contract to Deshaun Watson. Yeah. But, the quarterbacks are going to get huge bucks. We see the receivers starting to get big money. So what's next? The cornerbacks and then the defensive ends. I mean, Denzel Ward timed it right. Was an All-Pro last year, was an All-Pro in 2017, but he's coming off a Pro Bowl year, I should say, not an All-Pro, a Pro Bowl year. And as you point out, I mean, cornerback is one of the most important positions in the league. If it's a passing league, the way you stop the pass is either rushing the quarterback or getting the guys who can defend the pass. Denzel Ward's done a good job of it. I mean, I think you're going to see these contracts at these certain positions continually, people be amazed and shrug their shoulders. This is the way of the future, though.
It is. It's sort of the new normal, for lack of a better term. And you mentioned the Deshaun Watson contract. The Browns started their offseason workouts. He was there as well. But we're also seeing, Tony, another recurring theme in the 2022 offseason player procurement season, which is teams, or players rather, scrubbing any association with their team from their social media accounts. It's literally like the middle school equivalent of "I'm not talking to you because you made me mad." And the latest player to do that is wide receiver A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown has scrubbed all mentions of the Titans from his social media. Obviously, he's looking for a new contract. And quite frankly, he probably has some great leverage to do it based on the contracts that we've seen given out to Devontae Adams and Tyreek Hill. What do you make of A.J. Brown's leverage and the position he's taking?
Well, I think it's no coincidence that A.J. Brown and Deebo Samuel have the same agent. And these
Correct.
are guys who, as you said, scrubbed their social media and any reference to the team they play for. I mean, the Titans are right there. They want to keep these guys together to try and get over the hump. They're very close. And if you let guys like A.J. Brown go, these impact offensive players, that's going to put you further back. And you don't want to take weapons away from Ryan Tannehill. Word is that they will come to some sort of agreement with A.J. Brown to extend his contract. As you said, he's got leverage there. He deserves it, and I think it would be foolish for the Tennessee Titans to let him go. If the Tennessee Titans let him go, they're closer to sort of a rebuild with Ryan Tannehill there than they are taking the next step, which seems that they are kind of right there to do that.
Yeah, it's the old classic case of, does the quarterback make the wide receivers, or do the wide receivers make the quarterback? And I think in the situation of Tennessee, especially when you have the play action availability of Derrick Henry at running back, those players around Ryan Tannehill make Ryan a better quarterback, as opposed to a couple of the other teams that we've seen move on from wide receivers in Green Bay and Aaron Rodgers, and obviously Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes, where they believe the quarterback will make the wide receivers. So obviously A.J. Brown angling for that new contract, and we'll see what happens there. And then there's Kyler Murray. I feel like this offseason for Kyler Murray, the Arizona Cardinals quarterback, has been like a roller coaster. We go up, we go down, we go back up, we go back down again. He scrubbed everything from his social media accounts, and then it was sort of mitigated. And then he went back up again. And then he realized all the contracts that were giving out to you, as you mentioned, players like Deshaun Watson. And suddenly it went back down again. And now he is definitively not showing up, according to his agent, until he gets a new deal. So where are we on the possibilities of Kyler Murray working his leverage to get a new contract from the Arizona Cardinals?
Yeah, I don't think he's got much leverage. I mean, this is a guy that's been in a league for 3 years. He's got one winning season. He seems to be headed in the right direction. The interesting thing is how he and the coach are coupled together. I mean, one of the reasons that they selected Kyler Murray is they brought Cliff Kingsbury in as the head coach. So if Kyler Murray's gone, you've got to figure Cliff Kingsbury's gone. Word is that they think they will be able to work something out before the season. But it's as much, he is in unison with the coach. He is coupled with the head coach as much as anything else. I don't think he's got much leverage. He's an improving quarterback, but don't put him up there in the realm on the field anyway. Compare him to Deshaun Watson.
No, and that's the thing, right? Because I think we're seeing, and I think the Kyler Murray situation and what Deebo is doing and A.J. Brown is doing, we're seeing a lot more player empowerment in the NFL. And we're certainly seeing the idea that these players believe they can flex their muscles a little more to get what they want, as opposed to, say, even 5 years ago.
And some of them can, and some of them will. And we've already seen some of that. But it's not going to be a situation where everybody gets what they want. And the fact is, when you talk about the draft, this is where drafting in the later rounds is going to be all important, because when you're giving out these huge contracts to Deshaun Watson, to Denzel Ward, you better be able to pluck some gems out of day 3 in the draft, because those are going to be your inexpensive guys that fill out your roster and fill out your depth chart. Some of the guys will be able to flex their muscles, and we've seen big names traded. So teams are willing to trade for these guys, the Tyreek Hills, and pay them the big money. I just think that everyone may be getting a little bit too happy, and guys who are further down the ladder, like Kyler Murray, are looking for handouts that they may never get.
Yeah. Listen, I think his total compensation for this upcoming season is $5.5 million. And if they don't pay him, someone's going to pay him, because it's such a quarterback dependent league. If you don't have a dude, you are in real trouble. And we certainly saw that in the case of the playoff game between the Bengals and the Titans this past postseason, where, Ryan Tannehill is a guy and Joe Burrow was a dude. He made the play he needed to get them in position to kick the field goal to win the game. And Ryan Tannehill, given that same opportunity, threw an interception, which allowed Joe Burrow to throw the pass he needed to allow the field goal to win the game for them and move on to the AFC Championship game. And then there's the situation with Baker Mayfield, speaking of Deshaun Watson, with Cleveland. Look, it is so 100% obvious that Baker Mayfield is not going to be a part of the Cleveland Browns' plans going forward. Not only have they signed Deshaun Watson, to the most guaranteed money in NFL history. They signed his backup, Jacoby Brissett. And then recently they also signed the third stringer, Dobbs, out of Tennessee, who, of course, a few years ago was with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So basically what the Cleveland Browns have done is given themselves absolutely no leverage because everybody knows that they're not going to keep Baker Mayfield. They're not going to keep four quarterbacks. So the question is, what happens to Baker Mayfield? And the idea of Carolina, who is in also quarterback hell because of the situations and the decisions they've made, sitting at number 6 in the draft, which would be, let's be honest, a reach if you took either Malik Willis or Kenny Pickett or anybody else out of this quarterback draft at number 6. They find themselves in the precarious position of needing to go find and get a quarterback. So Baker Mayfield has sort of limited the options, or the Cleveland Browns, rather, have limited the options for themselves with the signings they've made at quarterback. So what does that mean for the availability of Baker and where he might go?
Well, a couple of things. Let's a little revisionist history. We had first spoken on this podcast, on this video cast, about the fact that if Baker Mayfield is traded, we said in the middle of March, it probably wouldn't come until draft week or draft weekend. And right. I'm hearing that there's very tepid interest in Baker Mayfield. Yes, the Seattle Seahawks have some interest. Yes, the Carolina Panthers have interest, but it's remote interest. They're not burning down the phones of the Cleveland Browns to bring in Baker Mayfield. And I'm told if a trade happens with one of those teams, it's very likely to happen after the first round next Thursday. Now, as you pointed out, the Browns have boxed themselves in the corner. Baker Mayfield comes with a guaranteed salary of just under $19 million. As I stated before, what I'm hearing is whichever team trades for Baker Mayfield, part of the deal is that the Browns are going to have to pick up a portion of that salary. I've also heard that the 31 other teams in the league are in no hurry to do the Cleveland Browns a favor because of that contract that they gave to Deshaun Watson. The other teams are looking at that contract and you're saying, you know what? At some point in time, we're going to have to pony up. That's that type of guaranteed contract if we ever get that quarterback, thanks to the Cleveland Browns. So teams are not looking to do the Browns any favor by taking Baker Mayfield off their hands. I spoke with Mayfield's people, and they tell me that if a trade does not happen draft weekend or a day or two after the draft, they're in it for the long haul. They don't expect a trade to happen for a long, long time, primarily because, as you said, the Browns are boxed in the corner, and it could be to the summertime before Baker Mayfield is moved. I asked the question, I said, well, what do you think would happen if it comes July or August and the Browns can't move Baker Mayfield? Would they just tell him to stay away from camp? And they said, no, you got to remember, as we've talked about here, the discipline, the punishment has not been handed down to Deshaun Watson from the league. And they feel there's a real possibility that if the Browns cannot trade Baker Mayfield and Deshaun Watson gets a 6 or 8 week suspension by the league because of the off the field issues, the Browns have to pay him anyway. They might as well bring him in and let him start the first 6 or 8 weeks of the season and then take it from there. It's a remote possibility, but that's a scenario that a lot of people feel may be played out because of the fact that the Browns can't move Baker Mayfield. And you know that Deshaun Watson is very likely going to be on the sidelines, if not for the first half of the season, or at least the first 6 games of the season. It's going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, Tony, I think those points are so important for people to understand, right? First and foremost, there's an old saying, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And when the Browns signed Deshaun Watson with all that baggage, and look, we can have the conversation on a weekly basis about guilty, not guilty, innocent. That's irrelevant. It's the idea of what he's been accused of, and the DA in Houston saying these are credible witnesses, these women that are bringing these allegations. Nothing happens in a vacuum, right? So when the Browns gave that contract to Deshaun Watson, literally every other owner in the league looked at Jimmy and D Haslam sideways and said, really, bro? Like, that's a real thing. And you need to understand that because, as we've talked about here on this podcast before, that was the first NBA contract given in the NFL. So now they've opened those floodgates. So to that point, you're 100% right. There are not people and by people I mean owners and general managers around the NFL, that are going to be willing to do the Browns any favors because of the floodgates that they've opened with the contract that they gave Deshaun Watson. And then secondly, there's the other issue. The Browns realize they know what's coming. That's why they structured the contract with Deshaun Watson the way they did, which essentially mitigates his financial loss from about $2 million a game per suspension to about $55,000 a game per suspension by backloading that contract outside of the 2022 season. So the Browns have simultaneously pissed off the other 31 ownership groups, when you include the Green Bay Packers, in the NFL by that contract. And also they realize, holy shit, we need to protect ourselves because we know the suspension is coming. They put themselves in a very, very dire predicament.
I think the next question is when is the punishment? When is the league going to hand the punishment down for Deshaun Watson?
Yep.
And I'm told it's probably going to be a couple of weeks after the draft. They don't want to do anything to basically take the shine away from the draft. We saw it last year with Aaron Rodgers. If you remember that story, ran for the entire draft. And if Goodell comes out with the next week or so and says Deshaun Watson's going to receive X game suspension, that's going to be the big topic. So the word is right now, it's probably going to be a week or two after the draft. Get through the draft, maximize the draft. I hate to say it like this, but this is the way it is. Maximize the draft. So Deshaun Watson is not the headliner. And then sometime in May, that's when they expect the word to come down from the league.
Look, this is not unusual or out of ordinary for the league. That's why those Friday news dumps sometimes come. Oh, like Friday at 4:00, we just decided to do this. Then you have all weekend to forget about it. So listen, absolutely right. There is no reason for the league to take away. Let's be honest. Outside of the Super Bowl or the postseason, the draft is the shining thing of the entire offseason. It is captivating. It is the only true reality television show that there is because nobody knows what's going to happen. There's no reason for them to mitigate any of the publicity that they're going to get from the draft by announcing the Deshaun Watson suspension before that. That just makes good business sense. In the NFL, you can say whatever else you want about them. They know how to run a business. That's why it's close to a $20 billion a year industry. So you're 100% right. At a minimum, this thing with Deshaun Watson will not come down before the draft. And quite frankly, even though May is a reality, a possibility, I'm not sure it's a reality because, in talking to people inside the league a couple of weeks ago, they had interviewed 11 of the 22 accusers in Deshaun Watson's case. And I think they want to make sure that they talk to all 22 before they hand down a decision. So as much as everybody, including Cleveland, which would help them with Baker Mayfield, would like to know when this suspension is coming down, it's not in the NFL's best interest to do that anytime soon. So we could be talking about this for a long, long time after the NFL draft has concluded. But speaking of the draft, Tony, let's get into it here. And as we get into the draft, we just want to remind you that if you want to level up your fandom with the 2022 PFN Draft Guide, do it, featuring yours truly and our very own Tony Pauline. Be the smartest fan in the room with over 750 scouting reports, exclusive video player interviews, and a behind-the-scenes look with video interviews of our PFN experts, including Tony discussing his days sneaking into the combine before it was a media event. Good job by you. Well done. Go to profootballnetwork.com/NFL Draft Guide and level up your fandom now. We sort of talked about this, Tony, at the beginning of the show, and it is really a very unique draft. In fact, I sort of went back and how far we've gone with quarterbacks not being taken in the first pick of the draft. So in 1998, it was Peyton Manning. 1999, it was Tim Couch. 2000, it was Courtney Brown out of Penn State. Then in 2001, it was Michael Vick. 2002, it was David Carr. 2003, it was Carson Palmer. 2004 was Eli Manning by the Chargers. Then traded to the Giants. 2005 was Alex Smith. 2006 was Mario Williams, the rush end out of North Carolina State. 2007 was Jamarcus Russell. Oh my God, still the greatest draft bust of all time. 2008 was Jake Long, who the Dolphins, by the way, signed before the draft began. That's never happening again, to your point about them trying to maximize the publicity of the draft. 2009 was Stafford. 2010 was Bradford. 2011 was Cam. 12 was Andrew Luck. 13 was Eric Fisher in the tackle draft. 3 of the first 4 slots went to tackles that year. 2014 was Jadeveon Clowney. 2015 was Winston. 2016 Goff. 2017 Myles Garrett. 18 Baker. 19 Kyler. 20 Joe Burrow. 21 Trevor Lawrence. The point being, it is almost always a quarterback taken in the first round, but that's not going to happen this year, barring the most ridiculous of circumstances that I can remember. Not only that, there is the possibility, Tony, it's not a strong possibility, but it's still out there that we may not have someone who touches the football by quarterback, running back, wide receiver, or tight end go in the top 10, which, wait for it, has never happened since they started doing this in 1936. So if you can, tell me what it means, not only if someone who touches the ball doesn't go in the top 10, let alone the top 5. What's the significance of that?
Well, I do think you may have a receiver or 2 go in the top 10, but what it means is, number one, maybe the league is smartening up. Maybe rather than reaching for quarterbacks, and taking quarterbacks half a round before they're worth going, they're going to go with the best players available. And the best player available in this year's draft are the pass rushers, the offensive tackles, and a cornerback. So it makes total sense that you're going to have the quarterbacks push down. You're going to have the running backs. We don't see running backs really go in the top 25 anymore. And
right.
Maybe the receivers. I do think you're going to likely see a receiver, if not at 8, most likely at 10. So I think that is a possibility. I think the other thing is, you mentioned how many times a quarterback has not been taken with the first pick of the draft. I think 2013 was the last time a quarterback was not taken in the top 10 of the draft. And I think that is what we're also looking at.
Yeah, listen, I want to make sure I get this right as I go through this. It would be very rare for us not to have a quarterback go very, very early. So, in fact, I want to make sure I get this absolutely right. So I want to pull up my notes here.
2013, the first quarterback selected was E.J. Manuel.
E.J. Manuel,
by the Buffalo Bills with the what was it? The 16th
overall pick,
and that was after they traded down with the L.A. Rams, who moved up to get Tavon Austin, the receiver from West Virginia.
Yeah, since 2001, there's only been 1 year in which a quarterback wasn't taken in the first 3 overall picks. And that was E.J. Manuel back in 2016. So we are talking about a long stretch of people not being taken in the first round with those quarterbacks. So that's a possibility for this year's draft, which would make it very unique. The other thing that makes it extremely unique in this year is that as we speak right now, again, 9 days before the draft, we have 8 teams with multiple first-round picks, which also means we have 8 teams that won't be picking in the first round as we speak, which would be a record. The idea that 8 teams would use those two first-round picks would be a record. I think 2004, if I'm not mistaken, we had 6 teams with multiple first-round picks. And then in 2000, you remember, of course, the Jets had 4 first-round picks and used them all, by the way, including Chad Pennington and Anthony Becht and a couple of defensive players in Ellis and Abrams. But it's very unique to have that many teams with multiple first-round picks. So let's go through the potential draft situations for all of those 8 teams as we speak right now with the multiple first-round picks. And let's start with the Chicago Bears. What are we thinking there?
Bears have picks number 39, 48, and 72. I actually think they're in a good position because they desperately need wide receivers. You move up to get Justin Fields. You got to give Justin Fields some weapons. They may have the option of Christian Watson or George Pickens at round 2, Khalil Shakir in round 3. They also need cornerbacks. I mean, they should be able to get a good cornerback at the top of round 2, whether it be a Roger McCreary from Auburn, a Kara Elam from Florida, Andrew Booth from Clemson. I think that the Bears are in a very good position. 3 picks on day 2, a lot of players at positions of need, a lot of good players at position of need, which they'll be able to choose from.
Yeah, and just real clearly, I misspoke. We're talking about the teams that don't have a first-round pick, the 8 teams that don't have as opposed to the teams that do. And then there's the Denver Broncos. Obviously, they made the big move to get Russell Wilson in the offseason. They certainly have a lot of weapons in Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton. What do you think the Denver Broncos are looking at right now?
Day 2 picks, they got number 64, number 75, number 96. They need defensive linemen. They need linebackers. They need a tackle. Maybe a Brandon Smith in round 3 from Penn State. If they're looking offensive tackle, an Abraham Lucas from Washington State. Maybe a Nicholas Petit-Frere if he's there at the end of round 2, the top of round 3. A guy who can play left or right tackle. Not as excited for the Broncos as I am for the Chicago Bears. I don't think they're going to be able. I think they'll be able to fit some needs, but the players that will be available to them are not as good as the ones that will be available to Chicago.
All right, so then let's move on and talk about another team we're looking at here, and that would be the Cleveland Browns. We think we know what they're doing at quarterback. We're good there. What are we talking about when we look at that team without a first-round pick?
Yeah, middle of round 2 with number 44, middle of round 3 with number 78. You got a good quarterback. They got rid of Jarvis Landry. They made the trade for Amari Cooper. Need another receiver. Maybe John Mechie of Alabama, who was a highly rated guy before the knee injury. He suffered his knee injury during the SEC title game. His teammate Jameis Williams, of course, suffered that knee injury during the national championship game. I'm hearing good things about Mechie. I heard it was a clean break. I hear he's well on his way back. He's going to be back sooner than later. Could be ready to play by June or July. I think that would be great value for the Browns. They may need an edge rusher, a guy in day 2. If he slides to day 3, Isaiah Thomas of Oklahoma or Nick Benito, his teammate, guys that can get up the field and create a lot of pressure.
Let's talk about James for a second there. If he hadn't torn the ACL, where are we talking about him going in this draft?
John Mechie potentially late part of round 1 if he worked out well. I think that would be a consideration. I think he's a guy that probably would have been rated ahead of Treylon Burks and ahead of Jahan Dotson as the 4th or 5th receiver in this year's draft.
You've talked a lot about Treylon Burks being one of those receivers that has fallen down the board as we go through the draft process. I guess my question to you would be why? We're talking about a guy who has good size, has massive hands, 9 and 7/8 inches. He has 9 catches in his career of 48 yards or more, which is tied for the most of any Power 5 conference. What is it? Is it just the 40 time that is dropping him across boards?
Not at all. It's the fact that he's not a good route runner. He doesn't separate through his routes, very unrefined in his breaks. You talk about the big plays, but he doesn't play that fast. I mean, that's the fact is he was able to get downfield and jump over defensive backs and come away with the contested throw. That works on Saturday. It doesn't come as easily on Sunday. And you look at the receivers that have been selected, especially in the early part. We've gone from the Keyshawn Johnsons and the big receivers to the sort of smaller guys that can separate through their routes and also have downfield speed. That's why Burks has fallen. It doesn't mean he's not going to be a good player at the next level. It just means that he's not going to be a priority on draft day. He catches the ball exceptionally well. He's a high character guy. Everyone who knows him likes him. Just a matter that he has to develop at that position. Somebody did point out that the system they played at Arkansas was the same type of system that they played in Baylor under Art Briles. And that system put a lot of early receivers into the draft, or had a lot of receivers go early into the draft, and they never panned out. So that is something to keep an eye on.
Well, that's a fair point when you look at Corey Coleman and Denzel Mims a couple of years ago. I think it was a second-round pick of the Jets. Right. And that hasn't really panned out. Then there's Miami. Obviously, they seem set up with Jalen Waddle and obviously Tyreek, and they re-signed Mike Gesicki. They get Raheem Mostert over from San Francisco to run the offense, the running game, the way Mike McDaniel ran it in San Francisco under Kyle Shanahan as the offensive coordinator. What are you hearing about what Miami might want to do?
1 pick on day 2, the 102nd pick of the draft. I think maybe they go center, Dylan Parham of Memphis, if they feel he's worth a pick that early. They also could look linebacker. Darian Beavers of Cincinnati, I think, would be an exceptional pick, especially for that defense. A guy who can play middle linebacker, can play inside linebacker, a real punch in the face type of guy who tested incredibly well, ran much better and tested much better than people thought at the combine.
All right, then we've got the Indianapolis Colts. Obviously, they made the big move at quarterback. Carson Wentz out. He's with the Commanders. God bless him. And then you have Matt Ryan coming over at the age of 37, who clearly has over 50,000 passing yards and an MVP in his mantle case. One of 4 people to have that before moving on. The other 3 would be Brett Favre, Peyton Manning, and Tom Brady. And Manning and Brady went on to win a Super Bowl with their second team. What are you hearing about what the Colts may be doing?
3 picks on the second day of the draft, the 42nd pick right in the middle of round 2. Listen, they got Michael Pittman. They got Paris Campbell. They need another receiver. Sky Moore of Western Michigan, a guy who's a downfield threat, a guy who stretches the field, would be a terrific vertical complement for those 2 receivers. Also need a left tackle if Bernard Raymond of Central Michigan is there, a big athletic guy who needs a little polish on his game. I think either Sky Moore or Bernard Raymond, both from the MAC, the Mid-American Conference, would be good considerations, or would be considerations for the Colts with that 42nd pick.
Do you think Sky Moore will still be there, though?
I think he will be. I mean, as we talked about last week, there are some teams that have an early second-round grade on him, but when you look at the depth at the receiver position, someone's going to fall out of the first round. It could be Jahan Dotson. We talked about Traylon Burks. And someone may reach for George Pickens of Georgia earlier than people expect. I do think that Moore will be there.
I got to be honest. If Traylon Burks falls out of the first round, there's a team that's getting a really, really good football player if you could find the right situation for him. Then there's the Raiders. Obviously, they have Devontae Adams to go with Derek Carr. Those 2 are back together after playing together at Fresno State, along with Waller and Hunter Renfrow. They bring in Chandler Jones to go outside of on the opposite side of Max Crosby, so they have the dual end, the bookend pass rushers. What are you thinking they might do?
Yeah, you better be able to protect Derek Carr so he can get the ball to a Devontae Adams. They still need a right tackle. They're going to try Alex Leatherwood at right tackle. Maybe this is his last chance before they finally admit it was a bust and it was a bad choice they never should have made. They like those big guys. You know, you bring in the New England Patriot regime over to run the Raiders. They've always liked those big body right tackles. Daniel Falele of Minnesota, 6'8", 380 pounds. He's got to get his weight down, but he's incredibly athletic. He fits the profile. He fits the need. Number 80, the 86th selection of the draft, right towards the end of as round 3 is closing out. May not be a bad pick.
Yeah, Falele literally since 2003, the biggest player measured at the combine. And Jordan Mailata, who is also a member of the same descent of him, said, "I never thought I saw anybody like myself until I looked at Falele and said, holy bleep, this guy is a mother bleeping truck on the field." He is a large human being. Then there's the San Francisco 49ers. Obviously, they're dealing with the Deebo Samuel situation, which is priority number 1 for them, considering how much versatility and flexibility he gives them where they can play him on offense. What are you hearing about what they might do?
Yeah, assuming they don't trade Samuel, don't get a first-round pick. They've got 3 picks on day 2 of the draft, the 61st pick. They got to replace Laken Tomlinson, who they lost to the New York Jets in free agency. I think a guy like Jamari Saylor of Georgia, played left tackle at Georgia, but projects the guard. Another big, tough guy, relatively good on his feet. Not a great zone blocker, but I think fits that system real well. I also think he's someone that's going to be NFL ready much sooner than later. I could see Saylor moving into late part of round 2, early round 3, and then starting by the end of the first month of his rookie season.
And then there's the Rams, who once again do not have a first-round pick. They're projected at this point to go 7 straight years without a first-round pick. I have a Half-Forgotten History podcast dropping fairly soon with GM Les Snead. We talked at great length about their philosophy, which is the polar opposite of what everyone else is doing, yet it's successful for them. Between Sean McVay and the GM together, they've never had a losing season. In the 5 years they've been together, they've been to 2 Super Bowls and obviously are the winners of the last Super Bowl. What are you hearing about what the Rams might do when they eventually get around to picking a player?
Yeah, when they get around, the 104th pick of the draft is their first selection. So, the Rams do everything contrary to what people think. I think they're going to take a punter. They need a punter. They got rid of their big name punter.
That would be the most Rams thing ever.
There you go.
Them to wait forever to take a punter.
And it makes sense because they got rid of their punter, their top punter in a plus-cutting move. They brought in a guy who's like roster fodder. I could absolutely see them taking a Jordan Stout of Penn State or a Matarazza of San Diego State with that pick late in round 3 to fill that need. Both of those guys are going to be NFL punters. So people will laugh, but the Rams will get themselves an outstanding punter at a cheap price and a guy that'll be starting for them come September.
Yeah, you can laugh at the Rams for this sort of business model that they've adopted, but I don't know if there's another team outside of the Patriots when they were in their golden era with Tom Brady and Bill Belichick that wouldn't want what the Rams have. As again, 5 years together, they've never had a losing season between Sean McVay and Les Snead. And yes, they didn't make the playoffs one year, but in the current playoff format of of a 7 seed. They would have made it that one year they didn't make it. They've been to 2 Super Bowls and won one of them. There's not a franchise in football right now that wouldn't sign up for what the Rams have been able to pull off without drafting first-round picks and using them to get, as Bill Parcells used to call them, pelts, proven commodities, something that Joe Gibbs and Bobby Beathard did in the 80s and 90s when they also went 7 years without a first-round pick and managed to win 3 Super Bowls, by the way, with 3 different starting quarterbacks, which has never happened before. This draft is very interesting, not only because of the lack of quarterbacks up front and the potential lack of people who touch the ball going very early, but it's also a very deep draft. The COVID years that we've been through with players hanging back for a couple of years to get that extra year in college has made this arguably, Tony, one of the deeper drafts that we've ever seen. And it may not be top heavy in terms of, big name talent that are going to be all pros and Pro Bowl players right away. But there are a lot of glue guys, for lack of a better term, guys that will really contribute to your roster in a variety of different ways that we have in the 2022 draft because of the last couple of years and the way things have been very uneasy and sort of all over the place. So it makes this draft very deep. So let's look at some of these positions, starting with offensive line. Obviously, the 2013 draft is going to be the offensive line draft of all time. As we said, 3 of the first 4 picks were offensive linemen. Where are you looking at the grades for this year's offensive lineman class?
Well, not what I'm looking at, but what teams you're telling me going into the final meetings this week. Most of the teams I spoke to have Ikem Ekwonu and Evan Neal neck and neck. Ekwonu is slightly ahead, is probably going to be selected slightly earlier. Not a single team I've spoken with has a first-round grade on Tyler Linderbaum, and we've talked about that before. Linderbaum was graded by people on the outside at one point in time as a potential top 10 pick. But the fact is, he's a little bit smaller. His arms come in at 31 and an eighth inches. He's not a big, strong, mauler guy. As I say, go back, watch that Big Ten game against Michigan. Watch what Chris Hinton did to him. He's a guy who's specifically a zone blocker. He needs a running start, and he's a scheme-specific center. Not a single team I've spoken with has a first-round grade on him. Be interesting to see, does he end up with the Cincinnati Bengals at the end of round 1 come next Thursday?
Does that surprise you that not a single team right now at this point has a first-round grade on him?
No, I think what surprised me is that people at one point in time thought he was a top 12 pick because he was never that player when you watch the film. He's good, but as I've said time and time again, when you compare him to, say, somebody like Nick Mangold was much further along when he entered the draft than Tyler Linderbaum was, and Nick Mangold was, the 26th selection of the first round?
Yeah, and Nick Mangold didn't expect to be going in the first round. He was actually out playing golf on draft day, and then they called him and said, "You were drafted in the first round." He was like, "Really?" So it's always a wild weekend. If 2013 is always going to go down as the offensive tackle draft, Tony, what's the likelihood that this draft in 2022 goes down as the defensive line or edge draft with so many guys that can create pressure off the end and get that bend for players? What are you hearing about the depth of this line?
Well, 2 things. Number one, the first 4 picks of the draft could all be pass rushers.
Yeah,
I mean, you're going to have Trayvon Walker and Aiden Hutchinson go 1 and 2, not likely 1 and 2, not specifically in that order. You're going to have Houston likely take an edge rusher, whether that's Kayvon Thibodeau, whether that's Jermaine Johnson. And if the first 3 picks are edge rushers, it's very likely that the Jets will follow suit. Because you mentioned the Jets had 4 picks in 2000. That was the last time they had a good pass rusher in John Abraham, and they've never been able to solve that. So if the first 3 players off the board are pass rushers, the Jets I think, are going to follow suit, and you'll have a 4th pass rusher and Jermaine Johnson come off the board. So that's how stacked it is. And what that will do is that will push up George Karlaftis, who's probably a bottom third of round 1 guy, but he's going to go in the middle of round 1. One thing I've learned from teams is very interesting, if not sad, is every team has a second-round grade on David Ojabo, who probably would have been the 5th pass rusher in
mid-first round.
But were it not for the Achilles that he tore during his pro day workout.
Yeah, that injury cost him so much money, and I just hope that he's able to get back. People always say, "Oh, well, he'll make this much." Yeah, but you you'll never make the money back that you lost. Like, it's gone forever. You'll get more money, but you won't get the money that you lost. And that's the tragedy in the Ojabo situation. Then there's linebackers, which I always find an interesting position, Tony, because you can talk about linebackers as edge players, or you can talk about them as middle of the field guys, which means that's a wild difference in how you value a linebacker in the draft, right? So what are you hearing about linebacker draft grades?
Yeah, specifically the off the ball, as they call them, the guys who play in space. Two SEC players. Nakobe Dean is getting late first round grades, although he's not worked out. He's probably not going to work out before the draft because he suffered an ankle injury. A lot of teams are not concerned about it. I would think with a guy that's 5'11", 225 pounds, you want to know what he runs, even though he plays fast and he's fierce. Getting first round grades. Christian Harris of Alabama, a guy who did not play as well in 2021 as he did in 2020 when he was spectacular. He's a guy who could sneak into the late part of round one. I'm getting early second round grades from teams, but they feel if the safeties are off the board, if there's no pass rushers left, if there's no receivers to the liking, there's a team late in round one that could take Christian Harris, who is your true linebacker. I mean, he's a three-down guy. He can rush the passer, but he can also drop off the line 10, 15 yards and cover tight ends, cover running backs in coverage. He's great in pursuit, running down ball handlers from the backside. Really a consummate three-down player. But this day and age, when you want guys, linebackers and defensive linemen who can get up the field and sack down in and down out, he doesn't fit that bill. There's definitely going to be a place for Christian Harris. Could be a surprise first-round pick next Thursday.
Yeah, and just so people understand, when you're talking about Nakobe Dean and this Alabama players, it's no surprise the SEC continues to dominate the draft. Over the previous 15 drafts, 147 players from the SEC have been drafted in the first round. To put that in perspective, that's almost twice as many as the next closest conference. That would be the ACC with 78. So we are talking about a massive discrepancy in the number of first rounders coming out of the Southeastern Conference. Then there's defensive backs. Look, the one thing that's really interesting about this draft, and you have Sauce Gardner and Stingley from LSU, and Kyle Hamilton out of Notre Dame is clearing away the best safety in this draft. But it doesn't feel like there's a lot of depth at the DB position here.
No, I think right now I'm getting four cornerbacks. Ahmad Gardner, as you mentioned, Derek Stingley, Trent McDuffie of Washington, and Kyler Gordon of Washington, all getting solid first-round grades. The first three don't surprise me. Kyler Gordon kind of does surprise me. He's a smaller guy who struggles making plays with his back to the ball, but teams like him as a first-rounder. Small school guy to keep an eye on, Joshua Williams out of Fayetteville State. Tall guy, 6'1" and change. He's got an excellent frame. Had his moments at the Senior Bowl, very unpolished, but he's getting third-round grades, which I think is much earlier than people thought. Teams are looking at him as a potential dime back. You bring him in, you develop his game, you let him play in dime packages, you let him play on special teams. They love his size, they love his athleticism. They like the flashes that he's shown. The last thing on the DBs, you mentioned Kyle Hamilton, Lewis Cine of Georgia, as well as Daxton Hill of Michigan are getting confirmed first-round grades. I don't know that they're going to go in the first round because you get a first-round grade, there's got to be a team at the end of the round one that needs a safety. But both Lewis Cine and Daxton Hill are getting confirmed first-round grades. Myself, I love Lewis Cine. I've always said Lewis Cine in round two is better value than Kyle Hamilton in round one because of the fact that Lewis Cine is a tremendous cover safety, great range. You can put him over the slot receiver. He's not a liability. Love his ball skills. Love his explosion. He's got decent size as well.
All right, finally, we'll finish it up with special teams here. And we obviously talked about that a little bit with the Rams. What are you hearing about other special teamers that people need to know about that perhaps they haven't heard yet?
Yeah, Jordan Stout, who had a great Senior Bowl, literally kicked the stuffing out of the ball. It was dizzying watching his kicks. He's graded as the first punter over Matt Araiza of San Diego State. Araiza, the big-legged kicker, who's also a real good directional punter at San Diego State. And by the way, I believe he hit on 4 field goals over 50 yards this year, so he can do some double duty for you. Yeah, he's rated behind Stout. Stout is getting day 2 grades. That's why I say I believe the Rams will look at him at the end of the third round.
Okay, now let's go through the position spotlight this week, and it's going to be offensive linemen. Let's start with Alabama's Evan Neal. Obviously, he's played a little bit everywhere during his time with the Crimson Tide. Started at guard, moved to left tackle. He's been working with Duke Manyweather to get his weight down to where it needs to be. And he looks like at 337 pounds, he almost looks slim, Tony, which is a ridiculous thing to say. What are you hearing about Evan Neal?
Yeah, played left tackle and also played right tackle as a sophomore at Alabama.
Everywhere. He's played everywhere.
Yeah, he is my number one rated offensive lineman ahead of Ekwonu, primarily because of that length. I mean, I'm somebody that likes tall offensive tackles. He's got it. I think when you look at him versus Ekwonu, he has a better chance to stick at left tackle, although I think he's better off on the right side. The versatility, the length, as you said, I mean, he's not a fat-looking guy at that weight.
No.
I mean, he almost looks like he can put on weight. You don't want him to, but the athleticism and the length, I just absolutely love it with Neal.
6'7.5", 337 pounds. But what I love about him, he says his all-time favorite player is former Cowboys Hall of Famer Larry Allen. And Larry Allen, for those that don't know, my God, out of Sonoma State, he was an unbelievable pick for the Dallas Cowboys. His nickname was the Sheriff because he owned that acreage in front of him. And he used to come to the line doing this, whoop, whoop, which was his indication. He's telling the defensive player, we're coming to you. I'm going to kick your ass, and there's nothing you can do about it. So if Larry Allen is Evan Neal's favorite player, that's a massive check in my book in favor of Evan Neal. You mentioned Ikem Ekwonu. What do you like about him, and what are you hearing about him?
Yeah, he's probably going to be the first offensive lineman selected in a draft, even though he's number 2 on my board. I mean, the guy is an incredible combination of intensity and intelligence. I mean, here's a guy who could have gone to an Ivy League school, but you watch him play, he's knocking defenders back off the ball. The question with Ekwonu is this: is he a right tackle? Is he a guard? Can he play left tackle? I don't think he can play left tackle. I think he's on the right side. More than a few people have told me that Ekwonu is in the conversation for the New York Jets with the 4th pick, which I think at this point in time could be a mild surprise to some people.
By the way, you mentioned him. He's really smart. He received scholarship offers from Harvard and Yale. His father's a doctor. His mother was a track star. His twin brother is a linebacker at Notre Dame. His oldest brother, Chike, is a 2D animator who's worked on series of Netflix shows, including Rick and Morty. His sister's enrolled at the University of Chicago School of Medicine. We're talking about a guy who has a million different options outside of playing football for a living, and that's what makes him very interesting. And then what are you hearing about Cross, the lineman, also out of the SEC?
Cross, of the top tackles, Cross is the most natural at left tackle. He's a guy that you can play on the left side. He's a terrific pass protector. He's got excellent length, very mobile. He moves lightly on his feet, gets out to the second level. I think the issues with Cross is he's got to improve his fundamentals. Also, never came out of a 3-point stance in that Mike Leach aerial attack at Mississippi State. Constantly lined up in a 2-point stance. That could be a learning curve. I mean, on running downs, how is he going to do it on Sunday when he's got to come out of a 3-point stance and knock somebody off the ball?
Well, the interesting thing here is he's 6'5", 307 pounds, and that sounds great. But when you're talking about, Falele at 384 and Evan Neal at 6'7", 337, it almost sounds light at 307, which sounds crazy. But how much of that is a consideration?
Well, it's got to be, especially because, like I said, he's never come out of a 3-point stance. So you're going to get a guy that's potentially is an outstanding pass protector, but you may be giving up something on the running downs, and it may take a while for him to develop into that run blocker you want when it's 3rd and 2, and you're going to try and jam the ball down the opponent's face.
Then there's Trevor Penning out of Northern Iowa. He said something to Jeff Schwartz on Fox Sports recently. He's like, what I love about my position is that I can physically assault a person in front of me, and it's legal. And he showed a lot of that in his abilities at the Pro Bowl and at the Senior Bowl and a bunch of other places. He is not afraid to be physical. If he is drafted in the 1st round, he would be the first ever Northern Iowa player drafted in the 1st round. Is this an Ali Marpet style player in the making here?
Well, I think it's Ali Marpet in the sense that Ali Marpet went to the Senior Bowl and purposely got in the fights on every single down to show that, hey, I may be from a small school, but I'm a big-time player. And that's what Trevor Penning did at the Senior Bowl. As you mentioned, I mean, every down he was trying to bury opponents' heads into the ground. I think he went a little bit over the top, but I think he was trying to prove a point.
But don't you have to do that almost if you're from Northern Iowa? Like, if you're Cross or Evan Neal or Ikem Ekwonu, like, you don't have to do that. But I know several players that told guys trying to make the roster in training camp in the NFL as an offensive lineman, start a fight. Yep. Start a fight today, and all the coaches will be buzzing.
You see, the thing about Penning is Northern Iowa played some big-time opponents. You go back earlier this season, Northern Iowa played Iowa State, and Penning was terrific. It wasn't that he was just burying people into the ground. He played under control. He was methodical. He's a big guy who plays with outstanding fundamentals. He's going to go in the first round. It's just a matter of how early in the first round he's going to go. He could go as high as 14 to the Baltimore Ravens, who brought him in this week for an official 30 visit. They need a right tackle. They need to protect Lamar Jackson. And Penning, even though he comes off as a tough guy, which he is, he's also a smart and fundamentally sound lineman, which you got to like. Don't forget, his teammate Spencer Brown was taken in the third round last year, is doing a terrific job for the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, listen, I just love anybody that comes from a small school and thinks to themselves, I got to use every tool in my toolkit and everything I have in my advantage to get people to notice me. So maybe it was over the top, yes, but we're talking about it. And I think that's the most important thing for a guy like Trevor Penning out of Northern Iowa. Look, we've had some great offensive linemen come to the league out of Boston College, my former colleague Damian Woody being among them. What are you thinking and what are you hearing about Zion Johnson out of BC?
Probably going to be the first interior offensive lineman selected somewhere in the last 10 picks or so. Zion Johnson played left tackle at Boston College successfully, played guard successfully at Boston College, lined up at center during the Senior Bowl. So you got that position versatility. He's either going to be a guard or a center in the NFL, but if your left tackle goes down for a series or two, or even for an entire game, you can kick Zion Johnson out to the left tackle, and he's done the job. He's got experience at the position. I would expect him to come off the board somewhere between picks 22 to 32. A guy who's just been ascending. Surprised a lot of people when he went back for that extra senior season, as you were talking about before, has improved his draft stock throughout the season, had a terrific Senior Bowl, tested well at the combine, someone who went back and really capitalized with a good year on that extra season of eligibility.
Yeah, starting 30 of 36 games over the last 3 years. And what I love about this kid at 6'3", 312, he was the definition of a late bloomer. He says his freshman year in high school, he was 5'9", 190 pounds. His junior year, he was 6'1", 220. His senior year, he was 225 to 230. And finally, he sort of matured and became the monster that he is now at 6'3", 312 pounds. Okay, we got time for a couple of questions here from people that have been putting up with us and watching this entire time, so we can put those on the screen. Let's see. Jack wants to know anything that can on the Saints' interest in packaging their 2 first-round picks to move up for the Lions' second overall selection to select a quarterback. Jameis Winston was good before he got hurt. I feel like the Saints are very comfortable, and I ran into Dennis Allen in New Orleans when I was down there for the Final Four at the Caesars Superdome. I think they're pretty good with Jameis Winston this year. I don't feel like they feel the need to press for a quarterback.
Yeah, they're not going to make a move that far up. If they move, maybe they go up to 12 with Minnesota to get a Malik Willis to develop him for the future. But they're not going to make at least I've heard nothing about them making a big move into the top 10 to reach for a quarterback.
All right, good time for a couple more. Andrew wants to know, has there been any further inside clarification as to why Jordan Davis only played 20 to 30 snaps a game this past season at Georgia? I guess the answer would be, look at the depth on the line of Georgia, right? It's not Jordan Davis's fault per se. Yeah. It's just if you have that many dudes at your disposal, you want to make sure you rotate them.
It's like, why didn't Trayvon Walker have more sack numbers? Well, because they didn't need him to sack the quarterback. They had him do other things. And you're absolutely right. Why play Jordan Davis 40 plays a game and wear him out when you can keep him fresh? And then late in the fourth quarter, he's coming in just as ready as he was in the first quarter because you've got so much talent on that front line. It had nothing to do with his conditioning. It had nothing to do with his motor. It had everything to do with the fact that Georgia was just loaded in that defensive front seven. They also had some good secondary players, and they were able to rotate him. It was good coaching is basically what it comes down to.
Yeah, and listen, that's the thing that a lot of people don't understand. It's not about highlights when you play college football. It's about traits that transfer to the next level. And when you look at Jordan Davis, those are the traits that you see from his time when he played at college that translate to those things that would be well at the next level. Got time for one more question here. And it's from Eric. Tony, did you give Kyler Gordon a first-round grade?
No, I did not. He was the one guy that teams gave a first-round grade to, or teams I spoke with had a first-round grade to, that I was a little bit surprised. I had a second-round grade on him. Still remains to be seen if he's a first-round pick, but a lot of teams think he is. I don't have him as a first-round choice on my board.
All right, and we'll see what happens going forward. Again, we're inside 10 days, 9 days actually to the number before the 2022 draft. It's the greatest reality show in television. Again, just a few years ago, how much money could you have made if you said, hey, I'm going to bet that the best offensive lineman in the draft right before he gets picked, video of him is going to be released on the internet of him smoking weed in a gas mask bong. Like, that's the beauty of it. Like, you never know.
2 years earlier.
You never know what's going to happen. I'll be in Vegas next week for this show, and I'm looking forward to it. Tony, we'll talk to you then. Okay, my friend?
Absolutely. Travel safe.
All right, buddy. See ya.